Hola amigos de 90 grados, yo soy Laura Aquino, directora editorial de 90grados.com y nos encontramos en el Colegio de Arquitectos y Arquitectos Paisajistas de Puerto Rico, en donde en breve comenzará la charla magistral The Future of Landscapes, The Future of Cities, con Marta Schwartz, arquitecta paisajista que nos visita a Puerto Rico gracias al Instituto de Arquitectos Paisajistas de Puerto Rico. Thank you for being with us.
It's my pleasure. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you.
Where are you coming from right now, actually?
New York.
New York?
Yeah.
And you have been traveling a little bit lately?
Yes. I travel quite a bit.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And today you're going to be soon speaking about, you were saying, sustainability in design,
And
right?
design, exactly.
And what do you think is what is mostly needed right now in terms of sustainability in landscape architecture and architecture?
Oh, well. What is really needed now is we have to start to really take on issues around climate change.
Mm-hmm.
That's the most important thing we have in front of us.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to learn about it. We have to learn what we can do to create resiliency, to adapt, to mitigate, and in the end kind of repurpose our cities so that we can survive what is going to be coming our way in the future.
Yeah, in the near future.
And now.
Yes.
Yes.
How did you begin to be interested in design and landscape architecture?
Oh, well, I mean, since I was a very little girl, I always made things. My background is in fine arts. It always has been. And when I went into landscape, I didn't even know about landscape architecture because everybody in my family are architects. So of course they didn't exist for architects. But I went in there to learn how to build earthworks art.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Interesting.
Yeah, so I clearly was on the kind of, I was a fringe element even in landscape school because I had a different kind of objective than most everybody else. And they all thought I was crazy there too. But I wanted to learn how to build landscape art.
Yeah, it's something that actually, when you look at an overview of your work, you can see that sometimes you can draw the line between maybe like an art installation in the landscape or landscape architecture, which actually makes your work even more interesting.
Well, thank you. I mean, we try to do that every time out, is to try to do something that is perhaps fresh or new or site-specific. Site specificity was a very big topic in the early 70s, you know, when landworks art first came out. So you want to try to find something that is really special to that place and express that. And I always wanted to do that, not in the deserts, but in cities, because I've always loved cities and that's where people live. So. And I mean, my point is that we have a lot of things that we have to accomplish, but we also have to accomplish communicating with people at an emotive way. In other words, we make a lot more decisions, many more decisions, based on our emotions than our intellect. So that's how art does communicate, and it makes people value things, you know, things of beauty or wonder or mystery. And we need to build our world so that it's about people, not about cars, not about buildings, but about people. And the landscape is where we all are citizens of a place. We all inhabit the landscape. It's how we walk to places, drive to places. It's everywhere. It's like actually all over the world, the landscape. It's everywhere. So how we actually treat it and recognize it as a piece of cultural art or a piece of our culture is something that I've always been interested in.
You have also mentioned that it is through the landscape that you create connections between people.
Yeah.
It's where we interact, actually.
Exactly.
What would you say is the first thing you look at when you begin or a new project? Of course, it's always site-specific or specific to that particular community and
What do you look at first?
I can't really say that I look at something first because it all depends on what that site is. Sometimes things are like so overpoweringly obvious to look at that you can't get around it. It's just there, and you really need to start with that. Or it may be that the specific needs that people have for it to function may be the overriding thing you have to really focus on. So it all depends. I mean, all these sites are so different. In that sense, landscape is so much different than architecture. It doesn't repeat. You can't do 15, 30, 80 floors over and over again. It's always changing. And the situations change because it's typically a very social place, or it's very political, especially the public realm, where everybody has a right to own it, and everybody has an idea about what it needs to be. So, I mean, it's a highly complex area to work in. So, sometimes these things take a long time to really get what the real focus of it is, and sometimes it's pretty obvious, but it's always different. It doesn't repeat very much.
What would you say about participation of a specific community in these types of projects? Because actually the people that live there know better than anyone else how it actually works, and maybe even organic activities that happen in certain places that might not be obvious to someone who is not from that place.
Oh, absolutely. Well, our practice, I'm not exactly sure how this happened. I didn't plan it this way, but we practice just in all different places all over the world. So first of all, learning about the culture there is absolutely important, and it sometimes takes a pretty long learning curve before you kind of get it. But when you're working with communities, the input from people is very, very important. We've done that quite a bit, but the other side of it is that also has to be managed. Like you can't put the designer in in this situation where you're trying to say, well, that will work and that won't work, or these things that you want to have happen, that's more important than that. There needs to be an intermediary who perhaps the community has chosen to be able to make important decisions about what is going to happen in open spaces. Because when you take everybody's suggestions, it turns out you need a site that's 3 times bigger than what you have. So there are ultimate decisions that have to be made. And then the other side is that people often really are not particularly articulate about how the landscape should look. Or people have an idea that, landscape is nature. But of course, since we're making our landscape, like we make our buildings or we make our cars, it's a man-made product. It can carry content. It can be like art. It could be funny. It could be political. It could be dramatic. It could be sad. I mean, there are all sorts of ways you can design a space. But you kind of really go through a very or maybe intuitive search for what the particular physical language is going to be that will fit, and be able to organize all the things that have to go into how people are going to use it. But as a designer, you try to make something that is kind of whole out of all the various things that people want, and bring that to the community and get their input. But you still have to stay in charge of that design process. So it needs to serve the community. The community gives you information, and it's a back and forth process. What is good is that we come up with lots of ideas. So through the tossing out of ideas, none of which you particularly are married to, but you're trying different strategies, you get a lot of feedback when you show something. Someone, do you like this or not? You go, oh no, I hate that. We say, okay, well when we don't, we won't do that. Or they say, oh, I like the way that so and so and so and so. And you start to get a general consensus about a direction that people can get behind. So it's a way of learning about people. It's through a design process.
It's like a process of not only creating place, but also a sense of belonging for the people that it's going to use it.
Exactly. I'm going to speak about that because if people cherish what they've created or helped to create, it will last.
Yeah.
And that is part of sustainability. They have to feel that they're part of it, or they've come to love it, or it comes to represent them. And that's when you've achieved sustainability.
And you can tell, because then those are the places where people actually want to take care of that place. And,
Absolutely.
And like you say, they
Absolutely.
last for a long time. Otherwise, they don't last at all.
You are absolutely right. You can get all the kind of mechanical stuff working. It can be made out of the newest technologies in terms of sustainability, but if people don't care about it, it doesn't get maintained, it doesn't last. So all that money and effort you've put into it, it doesn't matter if you don't do this last piece, which is to make people interested in it, or fall in love with it, or interact with it, or have meaning for that.
Yeah, focusing on what is this, who is this for? Maybe the client, whomever is paying for the project is an institution, a certain person, but actually the users are the ones.
They're the real clients. Yeah.
They are the real clients. Yes,
exactly.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. So that's what design can do. We try to make things that are of beauty, and I'm not defining what beauty is, because it can be so many things to many people, but something that has meaning, or there's a connection. But we're emotional beings.
We are.
We connect that way, so it's important to try to make that connection.
I wanted to ask you about what is it like to work in an office like yours, where you actually, like you said, have all kinds of projects around the world, versus, for other people would be a small office, it's a little more local, but you get to, have a contact with a wide variety of projects and people.
Well, the first word that popped into my head was hellish. Oh my God. It's really hard work. It's really hard work. And of course, the grass is always greener on the other side of the fence. Why couldn't I just have...
Pun intended.
Why couldn't I just have a local practice and get to know people and do something really good for my own community, wherever that is? But I would say that it's been an interesting life. Going to all these places and meeting people in different places and getting a sense of what's happening in the world. And it is a bit of a perspective from 30,000 miles up, or 30,000 feet up in an airplane, or maybe miles too. But to see all these different countries and different cultures, and I would say that our the places that we work most are in developing countries, which are the most difficult and also most fun to work in.
And you also teach, is that right? Or you
Yes, yes, no, I teach, yes.
Same feeling,
Yeah. Although what's really good about teaching is that in the real world, you have real clients, you have real deadlines, it's all very real, and the work comes in through the door, and you have to serve that client, whomever that is, a city or a developer or a person. But in school, I get to posit an idea, like, what if this were to happen? Or Moscow has this crazy ring road around it that is like an informal slum of a highway. And what is that? And you can bring in all these things that you would never get. Nobody would walk through the door and say, Martha, we have this MCAD, which is this last ring road around Moscow, and we need to figure out what to do with it. And you can do those. It really makes you think about things differently. I get to learn about things. We get to use our imaginations. It's really, they're hypothetical what ifs. And like the last studio that I ran at the GSD was very exciting for me because I wanted to see what we could do for the city of Boston in the year 2060. When we were working in conjunction with Harvard Forest, but what is the climate change effect that's going to happen in 2060 in Boston? And what are the likely technologies that are also going to be around in 2060? So the idea is that, okay, we're all going to be driving automated vehicles. So what we really need to do is reforest the city and insert working ecology into the city in order to deal with the rainfall, which is going to be much heavier and much more frequent in the wintertime and then not much in the summer. How do we capture it? It helps to bring down the heat load, the urban heat island effect, so that you need less energy. It helps to clean the air. It helps to create habitat. It helps us get water back into the aquifer, which is being drained. So, I mean, this is a whole kind of thing that I've been focused on, is how do we really get people to understand how much benefit the landscape can bring to cities. If you think about the landscape not as gardens or street trees, but as working ecologies that will help us deal with what's coming towards us.
And in that context, it like makes the infrastructure even more evident to even normal people that just give it for granted, and it's like, oh, that's right, the water runs down this way, and then maybe the sewage is not enough, or maybe it's too much, or I need to serve different things. And
exactly, it's like this great big dawning of this fact that everything is connected.
Exactly.
It's connected, and one of the things is that Boston's an old city. We don't have separate sewers, so as soon as there's a heavy rainfall, it's not a good thing. So how do you keep water that's coming down really heavily, because we're going to get too much water too fast, from going into the sewers? There are other ways of doing it, but there are ways of doing it so that you're reestablishing that which we have destroyed, which is functioning ecology. So how do we do that? And so I've been really working on that.
I wanted to ask you also something about a couple of things. First, what would you say of places that you have seen or been that they don't have yet a clear urban plan for a city, and therefore you see that the landscape also is almost not there, or if it is, then it's disconnected? What would you say is the difference when you see a place like that versus a place that has developed its landscape architecture and its...
Yeah, well, I have seen many, many, many cities, unfortunately, take a look at the United States as a model to what, in terms of what to do, when they should have looked at it in terms of what not to do. You hire on the traffic engineers first. You occupy the most valuable parts of your real estate with highways, with roundabouts, so people can't cross roads. I mean, I would say that for any place that is really serious about figuring out what they can do in terms of reshaping, replanning, master planning their cities, is make sure that they include a landscape architect on the team who represents that piece of the puzzle, which is the earth. The earth. And how people use space and how people will experience space, and get the traffic engineers, put them in the background or just allow them to speak for 2 minutes. I mean, they need to be there, but there are some very wonderful traffic engineers, but we're going to have to be thinking about how to move people around in cities through better public transportation. We have to make streets that are livable. We have to create places to plant trees so we can cool things down, not have as much use as much energy, deal with rainfall. I mean, all of these systems have to be thought about again.
Yeah.
For people.
Yeah.
For people, and to create wonderful cities to live in, that are at a scale and, are beautiful. And if you think the landscape is just about flowers and gardens and, an afterthought, that's very backwards thinking. That would be a shame to have somebody in charge of city planning who isn't aware of how important it is to get somebody there at the beginning. We're often asked to be the prime or the leaders on projects, and we put together the teams so that we're really seeing all of it, including the architecture, as in a holistic way, because that's how we're taught. There are all these pieces, all these moving parts. We're not focused on building an iconic something, and really make sure that the traffic systems, the pedestrian systems, the public's transport systems, the planting, the housing, the buildings, the scale, all of these things have to work together. So get a landscape architect and make sure they're part of the master planning team.
Because actually a street can be something really nice to inhabit or just a hostile place.
They can be very hostile, too big, too loud, can't cross them. They divide cities. But streets are wonderful. I mean, the streets in Europe are fantastic. The scale of them is wonderful. There are areas where their cars aren't allowed. They're pedestrianized, and people sit out, and they have dinners and lunches and breakfasts, and it's easy to walk between them, and they're at a wonderful scale. Jan Gehl, who is probably one of the best-known urbanists, says that you must build your city from the ground up, not the top down, not, here are all these buildings, and then we'll worry about all this and other stuff later. That's wrong, 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 wrong. You have to build it from the street up. As long as you have a street that is a proper scale, at a human scale, and you have activities at the bottom of the buildings, and you have places to plant trees and generous sidewalks and bicycle lane, doesn't matter what else you put on top of it, do whatever you want, but make sure that the scale and the functioning of the streets are working.
At times, it's older cities that you can see how they have worked actually the earth and the ground, which actually can inform better newer modern cities that at times they're completely missing it.
Really missing it. But, we all grew up here in car-focused building and development. It was all about the car. I mean, Corbusier's dream came true, unfortunately. But it really, really impinges on the quality of life. Nobody wants to live near a highway. Only the poor people get to live near highways. And very soon, we're going to have different modes of transport that will really cut down our need or use of cars. We have to go to a zero carbon economy as soon as possible. We have electric vehicles now. We're going to be using AVs soon. They take up a lot less room. But we have to be thinking about how to get people around in public transportation systems. And there could be multi-tiered, multi-leveled, but this building of our urban environment around cars is terrible. But I've seen some signs of progress. I was just recently in LA, and they're actually building these big car garages, and they're empty. Because nobody wants to deal with driving downtown, trying to go, it's expensive to park. It's easier to take an Uber, get dropped off, and get an Uber and go back. It costs maybe a little bit more than parking, but those parking garages aren't being used anymore. So there are changes. We need to think about these infrastructural changes that are coming in the future. And see the landscape as part of that infrastructure, not as an afterthought, here's a couple spots, we can plant trees in between all the other infrastructure. We have to really understand it as a way of protecting ourselves in terms of climate change, because that is a very serious issue. And I really believe that, I'm on a mission to try to get people to understand how powerful the landscape itself can be in helping us deal with that, especially in our urban areas.
One last question. What do you think about communities or groups of people that actually take over a place or do something to actually whether occupy it or call attention to a place so that it's it gets what it deserves beyond what they can do by themselves?
I think it's great. I'm all for them. And I mean, that's one of the things that we can do as landscape architects, is that this issue of social equity. I mean, poor people don't get trees, rich people get trees. I mean, we can actually make nice places for them without spending a whole lot of money. I mean, the landscape can do that. It's a lot less expensive than architecture, yet it creates much nicer places for people. So I think that now is the time for activism for everyone, that everybody does what they can. And I think that the people who are claiming their rights to places to be recognized, to understand their issues, the disparity between the haves and have-nots has grown tremendously as we've globalized, and we have to make that right.
Well, thank you so much for spending this little time with us. I wish we could speak even more because the subject is really interesting. But you have a speech to give.
Yeah, I do have to do that. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Quiero agradecer nuevamente al Colegio de Arquitectos y Arquitectos Paisajistas de Puerto Rico, a Marta Schwartz, que está aquí con nosotros, y también al Instituto de Arquitectos Paisajistas de Puerto Rico por hacer realidad esta charla magistral como parte de la Semana de Arquitectura Paisajista de Puerto Rico. Y recuerden que en 90 grados contamos historias de diseño.